legalizefreedom.com. Why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? From the nature of reality to the future of humanity. Listen without limits. Unchain your brain. Change your thinking. Change your life. legalizefreedom.com.
Greetings and welcome once again to legalizefreedom.com. I'm your host Greg Moffitt. My guest today is Christian Morris, who joins us to discuss some of the tumultuous events of 2024. In their own peculiar way, the national elections in the USA, UK and Ireland, and events surrounding them, were microcosms of tectonic shifts underway around the globe. As former British Prime Minister Tony Blair famously said in the wake of 9/11, the kaleidoscope has been shaken, the pieces are in flux. While the UK and Ireland have elected governments of incompetence, the incoming Trump administration is set to usher in a seismic shift in direction for the US, and by extension, the world. Meanwhile, happenings in other realms get weirder by the day. The recent UFO UAP phenomena and raging forest fires being interpreted by some observers as nothing less than manifestations of the trauma haunting the collective human psyche. In an era beset by uncertainty and trepidation, high strangeness is the new normal. Hi Christian, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast, legalizefreedom.com. Good to talk to you again.
Lovely to be back. It's been too long, but now here we are. It's the 15th. We're recording this on the 15th of December. And you say, where has the year gone? And the year has gone down Donald Trump, and it has gone down the Irish election, and it has gone down the British election, and it has gone... there's been so much that has happened this year that it's hard to know even where to begin. Just the breaking news in Dublin right now is that Israel is closing its Dublin embassy. And this is the news story that was only, I think, announced today. Now, what they're doing is they're going to move Irish diplomatic work to London. So what will happen is it's kind of like consolidating a smaller branch office to the bigger regional office. That is, and that's not to exaggerate the way that they work in diplomatic terms. The Irish office would have worked out probably from London anyway. But it's just a sign of the fact that the Irish government have just annoyed the Irish lovely man administration with their continuous insults of Israel, their continuous support for Hamas, which it is. It is support for Hamas. They say they don't support it. They do. Because you cannot be equivocal about what was done on the 7th of October last year. Either you condemn it outright or you support it. So the Israelis have had enough, and they're closing their Dublin office, which is a major gesture against this cretinous, ridiculous administration in Dublin, who really are like turkeys voting for Christmas.
Exactly. This is what it felt like, myself based in mainland Britain, from the north of Ireland, but having this tangential exposure to political and socio-economic events in the south. People like yourself, Thomas Sheridan, John Waters, and others. But that's exactly the expression I used. The Irish national election, took place back on November the 29th. And despite everything that happened in the previous years, including the referenda back in March, when people suggested there was a bit of the beginnings of perhaps a sea change, or a shift at least, in public sentiment, that the result of the election, just another kind of coalition kind of flavoured fudge really, was the electorate saying, see how we were treated during the pandemic period, all of that, never mind, more of the same. It's almost like they just can't imagine, to use a cliche, anything outside of that box. It's really, we've got this closed system, quite two-party system we have in a lot of Western democracies, and ones that follow that model, and that people just cannot see beyond that.
No, there's nothing wrong with a two-party system, but what's wrong here in the Republic of Ireland is that there is a huge amount of Stockholm syndrome, and that there is a huge amount of psychological capture done by RTE. And, I mean, I think I've explained it ad nauseum. RTE is Radio and Television of Ireland, which is our state broadcaster, our equivalent of the BBC. And the difference, though, is that RTE enjoys an effective monopoly. It had an actual monopoly until 1998 when TV3 came along, but TV3 never competed with RTE. They've never faced any significant competition or any real competition at all. And moreover, there's still a section of society here that gets its opinions from RTE. A normie woman called the house recently and was saying, we have to have a state broadcaster. I said, do we have to have a state broadcaster for 725 million euros, plus their advertising revenue, plus the license fee? Oh, she said, you're right, really. Yes, I said, I think I am. By the way, I said, why do we need to have a state broadcaster? When your parents were born, when my parents were born, we didn't have a state broadcaster, and the Sky is still here. So, I said, that's what you're just really saying is that I've been conditioned. Why not just say I've been conditioned to believe that we have to have a state broadcaster to tell me what to think? And then she said, well, I have to get home for the 9 o'clock news. That's what she actually said, to get home now for the 9 o'clock news. Yeah. And, I remember that conversation led me to think that this general election that we've just come out of was not necessarily going to be the major moment that a lot of people imagined that it would be. But again, I have said to people ad nauseum that we have already had our Trump moment, because people are saying, when's Ireland going to have its Trump moment? When Ireland's going to have its Trump moment? Are we going to have our Trump moment? And that's misleading, because first of all, we're not the United States of America. We don't have a strong executive president system here. So the notion of a person running for the presidency to change politics here is wrong. I mean, we have a Marxist as a president and he's caused terrible damage, but that doesn't mean that the office of the president lends itself in the same way that the office of the US president does. It does not. So we have a much stronger parliamentary system, and even in comparison to the United Kingdom, we have a much stronger emphasis on cabinet government and a weaker prime minister equivalent than the United Kingdom has. The Taoiseach is not as strong as the prime minister of the United Kingdom. So our Trump moment was actually those two referendums that you mentioned a moment ago. That was very significantly our Trump moment. And that was a Trump moment because, I mean, I don't think people have really grasped where those referendums came from, or the significance of those referendums being rejected, not by a hair's breadth, not by a couple of votes, but they were roundly trounced. The Irish people gave those referendums to Harvey Smith, and they were trounced by a big percentage. That was our Trump moment. It was our Trump moment, but an awful lot of people, even who think that they're on the alternative thing, don't realise that it was.
Well, what is this thing about having to have state media, just to, a slight aside, we have to have state broadcaster, whatever. You see that same arguments being made in Britain or around the BBC as are made in Ireland with RTE. Well, I seem to remember in the Soviet period when I first became sort of media aware in the 1980s, there was a lot of criticism of the state media of the Soviet Union and the state media of like the Eastern Bloc communist countries. And in the, as recently, you've had criticism of RT, the channel Russia Today, as being, that's just a front for the Russian government. Well, that's state media in that case, whether it is a front or not. You see what I mean? If the Russian government are funding it.
I'll cut through you with an answer to that. The people who lived in communist societies, in the old-fashioned Bolshevik societies in Eastern Europe, they knew that they were being lied to. And they knew that this was just rubbish from the government to lie to them. A large quorum of people, they were demoralised. They weren't taking on the system, but they knew that the system stank. Too many people in the Republic of Ireland still love RTE. I mean, that may sound like an exaggeration. And I remember talking to other British commentators some years back. And I said, you have to come here and live among the people to know the cult that I'm talking about here, that RTE has. You are in a cult. Can I use bad language?
Oh, fuck yeah.
That's great. I'm an awful cunt for using bad language, so great. But you have to fucking understand the cult that there's a difference. There's one letter makes all the difference. The cult that these people are in with RTE. People in the United Kingdom don't grasp it because the UK particularly Great Britain and England, for a very, very long time, had a genuinely and significantly competitive television. So there was, in the 1980s, there was very fierce competition between the IBA, with its two channels, ITV and Channel 4, and the BBC, with BBC One and BBC Two. And that particular competition is why British television in the 1980s was so outstanding. And I mean, even somebody who I follow, Coleman of Gwira, Ben Burp 93, is talking about that on his Twitter today. Was British television all that good? Yes, I think it was all that good. And certainly, like, if you compare it to RTE at any time, you know, well, there's not much to compare to. But I keep banging on about RTE. And the reason why I keep banging on about RTE is because it is so important. And we have come out now of a general election here in which, at least superficially, there is an impression that we're getting more of the same. I can tell you immediately we're not. It's not like the last government, which was a horrific government. That last government killed innocent people, and they don't know anything. Like, it hasn't surfaced, particularly regarding to COVID, it hasn't surfaced how that government treated people, but it will. The government that's coming in now is not going to have leftists in it, by the looks of it. But by the look of what is now finally crystallising tonight, Sunday the 15th of December, it looks like it's going to be one of the first governments in decades that does not have leftists. And leftists have done terrible damage to this country. I mean, there will be a time in the future, I hope I'm alive to see it, when we evaluate the sheer damage done by leftists to this country. I mean, as another person, an older woman, said to me, she said, my husband said to me, it's the do-gooders have ruined this country. I have. Jesus, they have. The do-gooders have ruined this country. And that will be seen eventually. And for the first time now, in a very long time, it looks like we're going to be getting a government that is centre to centre right. That doesn't mean that it's a nationalist government or a patriot government or any of that, but it means that at least it doesn't have the cuckoo, barmy leftists in it that it had with the Greens, who, I mean, what they put us through for the past 4 years will be reflected upon as an atrocity, and I don't exaggerate that. It just hasn't come out yet.
So how will it be, how will that shift potentially take place, more centrist or maybe even slightly centre-right? Okay, the Greens are wiped out. They lost all but one of their seats. There weren't that many anyway, but obviously can no longer aspire to hold any balance of power. So is it in changes of individual members of the House that this is going to come from? Because it's the same two parties really dominating the scene, isn't it?
It's not really, because Fine Gael, for all of the rubbish RTE is saying, Fianna Fáil had a better election than Fine Gael. So if you look at the election of 2020, it was like Fianna Fáil had one seat more than Fine Gael had one. No, Fianna Fáil had one seat more than Sinn Féin had one seat more than Fine Gael. It was almost literally like that. They were kind of there was one seat between those three parties, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and Sinn Féin. This time there isn't. Fine Gael has lost seats, and Fianna Fáil has gained, and Sinn Féin has gained seats. But it's going to be a Fianna Fáil government propped up by Fine Gael, and probably with those conservative independent members such as Carol Nolan, such as the two Aontú members, and so on. It's not ideal, but it's certainly a shitload better than what had been in for the past 4 years.
Yeah, the astounding thing, I think, I feel that I've sort of got a foot somewhat in two camps, someone who's, Irish from Ireland, but not, a citizen of the Republic. I've got relatives who live in the Republic, and so I'm, at the same time, I don't feel like intimately involved. It's sort of like an outside observer. But during the COVID, as you were saying, it was astounding to watch. Really, that when government in places like New Zealand and Australia and Canada were absolutely losing their minds in their sadistic treatment of their citizens, that Ireland was there kind of just doing its best to be in the top five in that count.
It was. And that again will be reflected as a very demonic period. And I don't think we've even begun to have any, even on our side of the fence, for all of the effort that we've put in. And I think in this country, the Irish resistance has been absolutely Trojan. I think they've been outstanding. I'm not in any way criticising anybody on our side of the fence, but I'm just saying that the process has not reached the point yet where we've had any real evaluation of what the fuck happened between 2020 and now. I believe that when that comes out, I know things that I cannot say here. That's all I can say. I know things that I cannot say here. That sounds very dramatic, but it actually is true. I know things that I cannot say about people being killed, about people being neglected, about people being abused. And the reason why I cannot say them is because they're actually before the courts. And I do believe that when that eventually gets out, because it always does, the repercussions of that will be enormous. Everybody says that kind of shit all the time. But if you take, for example, the Stardust fire disaster, that has had enormous repercussions because those people did not go away. They did not back down in the Stardust. They just would not stop. And they were right. Like Enoch Burke, he will not stop. Or the Burke family, they will not stop. And it's those kind of people who will not stop who eventually force the change that RTE and Fine Gael are so desperate to prevent.
Yeah, well, Burke's an interesting case. Again, that's just been something that I've been casually observing. But you could maybe, without getting into all the details of that, listeners who have no idea who we're talking about, but a dissident, shall we say, in the education system, deeply religious man from a deeply religious family. But anyway, you could argue if you were his lawyer or his, one of his friends that, you've gone past the point where maybe you're not doing yourself any favors anymore, and you could play it a little bit smarter because you do have support. But yeah, sometimes you just need people who will just literally or metaphorically, walk over the cliff.
A lot of people don't understand what Enoch Burke is about. And a lot of people who even think that they support him don't understand what Enoch Burke is about. If he were to back down, then he wouldn't be Enoch Burke.
Yeah, it's not so much back down as just, play a slightly smarter game,
That wouldn't be Enoch Burke.
No, that's true. And anyway, as I said, sometimes you need these people who just, walk into the machine gun fire and make it improve the situation for those that come after them, as it were.
He has caused enormous change. He is. People don't even get it again. Because it's like what Chairman Mao was asked. Well, Mao was asked, what do you think is the upshot of the French Revolution? Oh, he said it's far too soon to evaluate. And it's exactly the same thing. Are you thinking in the short term, the medium term, or the long term? And we're only dealing with the shortest of short terms with Enoch Burke, really. Okay, he's been in jail for 500 days, which I think is wicked and immoral. I think there's an evil involved in that man being in jail that I find, on the one hand, very familiar. I recognise that it is. On the other hand, I find it so abhorrent I can't find words for it. But we are still only in the short term with Enoch Burke being in jail. We haven't even approached the medium term, let alone the long term. We're not at a stage to really evaluate Enoch Burke just yet. Let's get back to the Irish general election, because it was interesting that complete loser politicians like Simon Harris and Helen Mack vote this time than they had got 4 years ago. And there is an answer to that, and the answer is Stockholm syndrome. What happened was, in the interceding 4 years, where McEntee and Simon Harris by no means topped the poll last time, they did. RTE promoted them relentlessly for 4 years. I sound like I want about RTE all the time, but RTE come here all the time. And once you've been red-pilled enough, in a sense, to see that RTE is a problem here all the time, then all you're doing is standing on the deck of the ship saying we're heading for an iceberg. You're not going to say anything else. If you see RTE the way I see it, then you're going to say the problem, boys and girls, is RTE. And after this general election finished, I said to people, don't run in your little political, the Freedom National Party or the National Freedom Party. Like, the election is that have all gone on this front, and they're all saying their Ard Cowarla and their major conference has resigned and someone has done that, and it's all Ruritanian, like Gilbert and Sullivan shite they're going on with, these tiny little minnow parties who did not manage to get one fucker elected to the Dáil. And what I've said is, look, your strategy is obviously not fucking working. And what you have to do is accept that if you want to get into the Dáil, you're going to have to think of other radically different methods. And one of the things I've suggested to people to do is to join Fianna Fáil, that is Micheál Martin's party, Fianna Fáil, to join them en masse. And, make Fianna Fáil into a radical, new conservative, nationalist patriotic party from the ground up. If 5,000 people join Fianna Fáil, that cannot be ignored. That's, to my mind, is blindingly fucking obvious, but it also ties in with the fact that their methods of creating these new patriotic parties have simply not worked. What did they say? Repeating the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result is a sign of being fucking cuckoo. So what do you do if you want to run for politics? People have said to me, well, why aren't you joining Fianna Fáil? Easy, because I don't want to fucking run for politics. But I'm saying this to the people who are disappointed that they did not get elected to the Dáil on this occasion. Why did you not get elected to the Dáil on this occasion? Because in the interceding 4 years, RTE ran relentless propaganda for Fine Gael. And Fine Gael, more than Fianna Fáil, I hasten to add. There is a big difference between those two parties, by the way. Fine Gael runs RTE, and they gave RTE 725 million euros, basically to get them through this election. Moreover, they were given the 725 euros after the disaster of those two elections those two referendums in March of this year. They were not expecting those two referendums to fail. Not just in the fact of failing, but also to the extent to which they failed. They were not expecting that. And, Fine Gael said to RTE, look, we need you to up your game here. There's 725 million. Get us this forthcoming general election. And RTE delivered.
Talking about the way, the last few years panned out, especially with the C19 period. I mean, I was listening to, and you were saying that there will be a reckoning in time, and that perhaps the shift that may be underway with the election just gone will help that moving forward. But I was listening to John Waters doing an election breakdown, one that he recorded a few days ago, and you were saying that there are things that you can't speak about, obviously for legal and other reasons. But John used the phrase that the Irish government were killing people. And still, I think for a lot of people, that's like whoa, just back up a minute. What are you talking about? People died, but the government wasn't killing them. But if we can speak in general terms, yeah, of course they were. Yeah, they absolutely were. And it was particularly shocking, as I said earlier, someone sitting here in the UK with what we thought was a draconian response to those events, and then looking at the poor bastards in New Zealand and Canada and whatnot, and then saying just across the water in Ireland, a country which the Republic, which they do know relatively well, and I just, how can you account for this absolutely unhinged behaviour? And a lot of people use the phrase like test bed, testing ground. Things were being rolled out in Ireland, I think they were in places like New Zealand, as a way of seeing, what could, how far they could push the envelope, how far they could go and still stay in office, or still have sufficient numbers of people, quote unquote, on board with the agenda.
Well, you're wondering how they did it. Well, they did it through Stockholm Syndrome. But the question is, how did so many people be in a position at that critical moment in time to do what they did? Don't forget something about COVID. The whole thing was done of its own free will. So in other words, there was no compunction on the Irish government to in any way sign up for any of the bullshit around the COVID. This is why we are a sovereign government. They could have just said no. They signed up for this of their own free will because they wanted to get a pat on the head from globalists, from the EU, from the WEF, and so on. Then what happened was the RTE thing kicked in with so many people in the population here. RTE ran wall-to-wall COVID propaganda. They still in a way are. While at the same time, they had parties for Samhailwan they broke all the rules. They broke all the laws. RTE's own staff did. While at the same time, haranguing, harassing and lecturing people 24/7. If we get back now to the general election, I actually put something on Twitter. The reason why the Irish people retreated into a Stockholm syndrome situation of voting back in these abusers and bullies and cretins who treated them so badly. They voted in the vast majority of them. But the reason why they did was because RTE has them so brain fried over the past 4 years that they literally do not know whether they are coming or going. And when you have people in that state of psychological trauma, then they will retreat to the safe space. And for them, the safe space is to continue to vote for that cretin with a nice suit or a nice dress who they've been voting for all the time previously.
Yeah, well, I understand the Stockholm syndrome in the sense that, how that functions. But just for it, I mean, I think you're really hitting the nail on the head there with talking about the media landscape, with RTE being so dominant. I mean, to talk about for a second, you said that, they've been getting however much money it was from Fine Gael. I think that was the one I never really could tell the difference between those two growing up. But like 720 something million. How does the funding? I mean, where would the party get money like that? How does the funding of political parties work in the Irish Republic? Is it very much like the UK model?
I don't know. I don't know where. Well, I can't say I paid that much attention to the structure of funding of Irish political parties, which actually is very important because the funding of a political party is what gives them the ability to get into people's. Quite aside from the fact. Separately from the propaganda and support they get from RTE. But funding a political party is very important. But I don't know how they're funded. The money that they gave to RTE or that they have pledged to RTE, the 725 million, is straight out of our taxes. Now, I suppose the question is, how is that legal? And the answer is the government can make these decisions. Sometimes the government has a sovereign power to do these kind of things. The reason why it's legal to give them 725 million is because it is not explicitly illegal.
Yeah, that color of law sort of thing. Do you have a license fee equivalent in the Irish Republic? You do.
Yeah, so you have to pay your license fee, they get advertising revenue, and then they get this big dig out as well. I know, it's outrageous. It's absolutely fucking outrageous.
So, unlike the BBC, you will see, I haven't watched RTE for so many years, you'll see commercial adverts in the breaks on RTE.
Don't even start me on those. Don't even start me on what we see for Christmas advertisements and what they're trying to pretend passes off as a family these days. Don't go there. No, thanks.
But just even on the face of it, that's an issue because it's one of the reasons that the license fee is justified in the UK. Is because, the BBC can't seek commercial funding through advertising, so therefore we have to keep them independent, as it were, in every sense of that word.
What I would say about to be optimistic is that this whole thing is, I've drawn the analogy of a person or family who live in a log cabin. And it's getting colder and colder and bleaker and more wintry outside. They live in this log cabin and they long ago ran out of proper fuel. They haven't made any efforts to get new fuel in or to store it up. So they began burning the furniture. They've now, at this stage, the Irish establishment has gone beyond burning the furniture and they're now stripping the walls off the cabin and burning those. And that is the stage that the Irish establishment is at now. So I'm using quite a drastic... I'm being optimistic in a drastic sense that the forthcoming collapse, and I do think that that's coming as every day goes past, we're seeing it more and more and more. The forthcoming collapse is going to sort this crowd out. Both the Irish establishment and all of their cretinous supporters and these frightened middle-aged boomers, bungalow boomers as they're called in many instances, these people who continue to run back to the likes of Helen McEntee and Norma Foley and all these dreck like that, they've been too complacent for too long. And tonight now, the announcement that the Israelis are taking the embassy out of Dublin, the forthcoming second Trump presidency, they're all very, very serious fire alarms going off for that Irish establishment, which has been too complacent for too long. Here's just an anecdote. Here's just something on the side. When Donald Trump won that election on the 6th of November, just gone out, the first response of the Irish establishment was pure shock. I mean, Aidan Reardon, or whatever he's called, he's now an MEP, and he's a hardline Marxist. Aon O'Riordan is, he said they've been voted back in a fascist. I think some of the rest of them said something similar. And then about a day later, I noticed that they went silent. And I remarked this to my friends. I said, the whole Irish establishment really seems to think that Kamala Harris won. They've really just gone into such a barmy state of denial here that they think that Kamala Harris won. And that's... They've gone, well, it's a cult. And one of the features about a cult is that when a cult is actually challenged, particularly from an exterior force, which is much more powerful than it is, a cult retreats into itself. So we're looking tonight at people in Dublin who are celebrating the fact that Israel is taking its embassy out of Dublin. Oh God, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Do you know how much money Israel brings into this country through tech jobs? And those now, if the Israelis are taking their embassy out of Dublin, that is largely a sign that the tech jobs are going to follow. So, and also, they're going to go elsewhere, because Trump is going to start applying punitive tariffs to the Republic of Ireland. I even said this in a chat group a few weeks ago. I said, the economic outlook here is very, very bleak. Don't be worrying about builders wrecking the area with apartments and all of that. The money's going to be going very, very soon. Don't worry, I've said to people. Forget about it. Don't worry. And somebody said, Christian, you come over like a nut job. And that was just the Pavlovian training came out of this gimp. He didn't say how I came over like a nut job or how my economic analysis of the forthcoming second Trump presidency is wrong. He just responded to the Pavlovian name-calling that RTE has trained people to do. If you look at Patrick Keelty, that piece of rubbish Patrick Keelty interviewing Piers Morgan, and Keelty comes out with the smug, superficial, empty name-calling, and Piers Morgan completely wipes the floor with them. But the clapping seals in the audience, woo! They did this kind of American affectation that was crept in as well. This whoop, woo! When Keelty just threw names at Piers Morgan. And as somebody else on Twitter said, I'm fucking sick of this shit. The way that they just go for these buzzwords and they shut proper debate down on RTE, and they do it all the time. And, as somebody else, I think it was John McGurk said, this smugness is what is passed off as intellect in RTE. That's how cozy they are. And so they're getting 725 million for this crap. And it does go to show also that there is still a quorum of people within our population, in the Republic anyway, who have not got access to the internet to get something that's a little, whether it's true or not, whether the internet is giving you the truth or not, to at least give you something that's different from the shite that's coming out of Montrose all the time.
Was it the Israeli embassy in Dublin that was rammed by a vehicle a while back?
That was the Russian embassy.
Russian embassy. Well, I'm going to say it might as well be the same thing, but it was just...
you've taken the words out of my mouth. It might as well have been the same thing.
Yeah, so that would have been over the Ukraine thing, but the similar kind of knee-jerk reaction, based on all that you've said, all that lack of intellect and analysis and actual critical thought about the issues. Well, it's interesting that talking about tech jobs and Israel, and then thinking about tech jobs and the USA, how many American companies made their European base in the Irish Republic, because of tax breaks and whatnot. And people, still somehow imagining that despite all the evidence to the contrary, that Kamala Harris had won. I mean, you look at their absolute deranged reaction to Trump's victory in the US, and then look at it, other countries around the world. And I don't know what remains to be seen, whether the US administration under Trump follows through on some of the promises stroke threats about, shoring jobs back into the States. And obviously there's quite a significant Silicon Valley component, not least Elon Musk, involved in the current administration. But and of course I think historically, I remember as a kid going to the Ulster American Folk Park, and just the emphasis on the strong links between Ireland and the founding of the modern US and everything else. And there's 10 times more people in the US that claim to be part Irish than there are people in Ireland, full stop, the entire population of indigenous people. So, yeah, it's an interesting tapestry. It'll be really interesting to see how not just in relationship with the Irish Republic, but in Trump's administration, how their relations with with the EU and with the UK and stuff unfold. Given the abject bitter hostility towards Trump in his first administration, and then during the Biden years, and then again through to the recent election.
Well, I think Trump is going to be the Enoch Burke of US presidents, because rather than focusing obsessively on the minutiae of what he may deliver over the forthcoming 4 years of his forthcoming presidency, it is better to just see him as Enoch Burke is, a vector of chaos and a vector of change. The fact that Trump is getting in at all speaks for itself, and the fact that Trump is getting in at all is its own catalyst, irrespective of what the specifics he may get into subsequent to his inauguration on the 20th of January. And Trump derangement syndrome is real and it's serious. And, they laugh at us when we talk about Trump derangement syndrome, say these people who all have diabolically bad Trump derangement syndrome. It's a very significant thing, because what it is it is an absence of rational thought. And we saw that absence of rational thought when Paddy Keelty was being insulting to Piers Morgan rather than coming out with any kind of substantial response. And this is what we're dealing with here. Now, we're dealing with an absence of rational thought, a kind of a group hysteria. And if we take, for example, all of those what are being referred to as drones that are appearing off the coast of New Jersey, predominantly, I think there's many of them off Florida as well. They're not drones. They are like AI figures, in as much as some of them, on some occasions, somewhat resemble drones. But then when you look closer at them, they don't make sense. You know the way with AI, there's 3 hands and there's kind of 5 legs situation, or a hand sticking out of somebody's ear. And this is even at the most sophisticated AI technology, it still goes assways. And this is when you look closer at these drones, or what are called drones, off the coast of New Jersey, etc. They are actually like that upon closer scrutiny. They don't make sense. Their positioning is logically impossible. They are not making any kind of electromagnetic impact on the area that they're in, or they're not being picked up conventionally they're only being seen by people, and in some instances perhaps heard by people, I don't know, but they're not registering on the proper spectrum, the way that if they were real drones, they would be. Moreover, where are they coming from? It doesn't make logical sense. And I mean, my own take in it, and I'm certainly not the first person to come out with this, I think Thomas Sheridan has commented on it as well, and he tends to be right about these kind of things. This kind of esoteric shit is right up his street, Thomas Sheridan's. They're a manifestation of the clash of an old paradigm or paradigm. And the clash comes from what I described earlier, manifesting in Ireland, whereby the Irish establishment is simply not able to accept that Trump won. And there is a lot of... New Jersey was a very syndrome state, as indeed was Trump's native state of New York. That's a very TDS state as well. And the collective psyche is simply not comprehending both what has happened and what, in their fearful minds, and they're all NPCs anyway, their fearful minds, what is imminent. And moreover, that could indeed be something coming from the future manifesting itself backwards. We've seen lots of this happening in the past 4 years since the COVID got started and the demonic thing that the whole COVID thing was. I was talking to some people yesterday and we said, there's never been anything like that. The whole COVID thing was unprecedented in its scale, but also in its the way that it grabbed the human psyche that way. The Second World War, I gather, was not like that. I wasn't around at the time. But, and this is what those drones are. They are, in my opinion, and I agree with Thomas Sheridan's theory. He may think I'm wrong or I'm inaccurate in my analysis of what he's come out with. But what I gather from him is that his take on it is that there is a logical clash happening in NPC minds, and they don't know how to manifest it, and it's manifesting itself in these drones. These drones look like they were designed by AI for NPCs, so they don't make physical or logical sense. So there's a real AI thing of these drones. They're an incredible phenomenon that's happening of the East Coast of the US, and they're terrifying the establishment and they're terrifying people because they don't know what it is.
That concludes part 1 of our interview. Part 2 will be available soon in the subscribers area at legalizefreedom.com.
legalizefreedom.com